going to begin the story of Samson, which is really the last judge story in the book of Judges. It's also the longest. And we want to watch for a couple things before diving into the story. Now, this is kind of one of these dangerous points, right? Because most of us are sort of like familiar with the Samson story in some way, right? You may have seen the Samson and Delilah movie or opera or, whatever. And that's always dangerous, right? Because then we think we know what's going on and we don't pay attention. So one of the things we'll want to watch with the Samson story is this. I think that Judges, in effect, portrays Samson as kind of like the personification of Israel, such that everything that's wrong with Israel is reflected in him. He sort of reflects the character of Israel, and so we'll want to watch that as the story goes on and progresses. So we're going to start at Judges 12, 8 and following, which is the transition, and then we'll start with, we'll get into the story of Samson's birth, which is actually quite long and also quite interesting as well. So we get a listing of the intervening judges that intervened between Jephthah and Samson, and we're just told a little about them. We're told about Isban of Bethlehem, and he had 30 sons and 30 daughters. That must have been, one heck of a college tuition bill. And then we have Elon, the Zebulunite, who judged Israel. And then we have Abdon, who had 40 sons and 30 grandsons, and they had 70 donkeys and all that kind of stuff. The thing that we probably should get here about this transition is that we probably have a period of like relative calm, maybe even like relative faithfulness during this period. But then in 13:1, it all comes to like a grinding halt. And the people of Israel, again, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So there we are back to the same old story. And here's what happens. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. So what happens, right, is that the Philistines are largely these people that live along the Mediterranean coast. They live in these city-states. And they're a very advanced civilization. They're a civilization of merchants. They've got a big navy. And so now Israel comes under the dominion, the domination of the Philistines as a form of punishment. Now, what's interesting is what doesn't happen next. Remember, we've noticed this pattern, right? The people of Israel do what is evil in the sight of the Lord. The Lord allows someone to, oppress them. And then the people cry out for help. And then usually a judge comes along. It's interesting because there's no cry for help. There's no report that the people of Israel begin asking for a judge and deliverer. And that may be significant. It could be, right, that we could be at that point where they've kind of basically moved to that point of acceptance. Right? Okay, well, this is the way things are, so, hey, we're just going to live with it. So here's the story, or part of the story of Samson's birth. And the thing that we want to note here is we want to note the elaborate nature of the birth. That is, this story about Samson's birth actually takes up like a whole chapter. And we usually don't get something like that until someone who's like really, really important. The next time we'll see anything like this in terms of significance will be once we get to 1 Samuel and the birth of the prophet Samuel. We've seen something like it when we get the description of Moses' birth, but this is really interesting and also unusual. So I want to pay careful attention to it. So here's what happens. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. So notice what happens here. There's no cry for help. Instead, the initiative now comes from God. And God comes to this couple, couple who are childless, right? And we've seen some of this already, right? We can think in our minds like of a number of childless couples, right? Probably the most famous one this far are Abraham and Sarah. We'll see others along the line. But the thing that we want to notice here, and this is one of the things I think is really interesting, is we just want to kind of think about the similarities that exist between the part of the story that I just read to you and what happens in Genesis 18. This is the story of the announcement of the birth of Isaac to Abraham and Sarah. And here's part of what happens. This is Genesis 18, 9 and 5. Remember, we've been told that Abraham and Sarah are childless, that Sarah is infertile, she can't have children, and so there's been this long agony about what's going to happen next. And so here's what happens. These three men come to visit, and it's kind of odd, right? Because there's kind of this interesting alteration. Sometimes the three men are treated as individuals, but then sometimes they speak with one voice. That is, are they three men or are they one? Well, you be the judge. And by the way, who exactly are they? Sometimes they seem to be men, sometimes they seem to be an angel, sometimes they seem to be God himself. So once again, that's not clear, and that's probably intentional. So here's what the three men say to Abraham. They said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." Then the Lord said, so now this is the three men talking, and now they're identified as the Lord. So the Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years, and the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am old and worn out, and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'I shall indeed bear a child now that I'm old'? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I'll return to you. I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "But you did laugh because I heard you," or something like that. So two things here that we want to notice from Genesis 18 that are interesting parallels here, right? First, once again, right, the initiative comes from God. God comes and says, okay, you, infertile couple, are going to have a son. And in the case of Abraham and Sarah, right, it strikes them as sort of absurd. And, the way that the writer has posed this is it's kind of phrased in a kind of like a delicate manner, right? But basically Sarah is, kind of has an earthy streak, and she says, "Hey, look, my husband Abraham is like no spring chicken." And, I'm not a spring chicken either. As a matter of fact, both of us have one foot in the grave and one foot on a banana peel, and we're not long for this world. So how's this going to happen? And that's when God poses a really important question. We're going to see the same question occurs here. The question that's posed to them is anything too hard for the Lord? That is there some limitation that somehow binds what God might do? Now, when you think about it, right, the answer to that question is almost self-evident. If God is in fact the creator, if God has in fact created the whole universe out of nothing, if in fact the whole order of the universe and everything in it is directly dependent upon God's gift of being, that must mean that the only possible answer to that question must be no. Is there anything that's too hard for the Lord? No. And Abraham and Sarah are about to find that out. Now we have the same thing happening with this childless couple, only with a slightly different twist. Did you notice that in verse 13:6, for behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. So you may remember that when we were doing the book of Numbers, this is probably like 7 years ago, I think. Or it only seems like that way. We took a look at number 6, which is the Nazarite vow. So remember, the Nazarite vow was a temporary vow that either a man or a woman could take as they were engaged on some particular mission or purpose. And basically, the Nazarite vow involved a couple of things, right? First, they don't come near anything unclean. They don't cut their hair. And they don't come near any strong drink or any wine or anything like that. And the Nazarite vow here is presented as a kind of separation, a visible separation from other people for a period of time for the purpose of accomplishing a mission or purpose. Now, notice that what's going on here. This is really different. The child who's about to be born, Samson, doesn't take a Nazarite vow. One is imposed on him by God. Right? Normally, a Nazarite vow is something that someone takes temporarily. And then when whatever they were trying to do is over, right, the vow is no longer applies. Here we're told that the vow, the Nazarite vow, is actually being imposed on Samson by God. Now, I think that's important because, once again, this is part of the case, I think, for seeing Samson not just as an individual, not just as a person in a story. Rather, this is the beginning of the idea that Samson kind of represents Israel. Because why, right? Israel didn't sort of approach God and say, hey, we'd like to apply to be your covenant people because we don't really have anything else to do. You know, where do we sign up? Rather, that's something that happens at God's initiative. Okay? So the covenant is something that Israel does not sign up for. It's something that's given to her. And now Samson kind of is in the same mode with this Nazarite vow. The other thing that we want to notice here, right, is notice this. And this will be part of the drama of the story. From the beginning, literally from the beginning of his life, right, Samson sort of has a vocation lined out in front of him. And part of the story is going to be his kind of failure to live into that vocation. Once again, right, another aspect of thinking about Samson as representing Israel. Israel too has a vocation that she too only lives into spasmodically and in a kind of fragmentary way. So once again, there's this interesting parallel between Samson and the people of Israel. Third thing is that God makes it clear here that Samson's being raised up to be Israel's deliverer, and we'll see that it takes him like a really, really, really long time to live into that role. Okay? It's like, think of Samson, think of the story of Samson as a, 2-hour and 20-minute movie. And you only get Samson living into the vocation that he has like in the last 10 minutes of the movie, if you're still in your seat by then, okay? You haven't walked out, okay? So that'll be another thing that we'll want to take a look at. So we have this interesting parallel between this and Genesis 18, and also now we have the parallel between Samson and also the people of Israel. One final thing that we just want to kind of note, and this I think is important too. There are two other really important figures in the Bible who are also presented as Nazarites. The next one on down the line is going to be the prophet Samuel. So we'll see him as a Nazarite too. And then the next one after that will be John the Baptist in the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke. We're told that he's to have no strong drink. So John the Baptist also appears to be a Nazarite as well. So notice what happens after this. This is in Judges 13, 6 and following. Then the woman came and told her husband about this conversation that she had with the angel of the Lord. A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of an angel of God. Very awesome. I did not ask him where he was from, as he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and so then drink, and so no strong drink or wine. He's to eat nothing unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb until the day of his death. So a lifelong Nazarite vow. Now, then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what we are to do with the child who will be born. And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of the Lord came to the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. So the woman ran quickly and told her husband, behold, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me. And Manoah arose and went after his wife and came to the man and said to him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? Notice he doesn't refer to her as his wife. Did you talk to this woman? And he said, I am. And Manoah said, now, when your words come true, what is to be this child's manner of life, and what is his mission? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful, so she may not eat of anything that comes from the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, or eat any unclean thing. All that I commanded, let her observe. So notice what's happening here. And this is really important too. Manoah and his wife are portrayed here, and I think we want to take note of this. Manoah and his wife here are portrayed as being sort of like very, very pious people, okay? While Israel is rife with idolatry and worshiping other gods, Manoah and his wife are very, very attentive to what God might be doing. And that's why Manoah is so intent on talking to this angel, right? He's not just asking, to satisfy his curiosity. He's in effect saying, look, I want to make sure that I'm going to do this right, okay? If you're an angel of the Lord and you have like a design for my son and there are things that we need to do, I want to know what they are. So he's very, this is a very pious couple, very pious family. We'll, of course, later on meet another very important pious couple who will also have a very important mission. And of course, that pious couple is Joseph and Mary. So I think that's another really important thing. So we'll finish the story out here. Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, please let us detain you and prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name? So that when your words come true, we may honor you. The angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing that it is wonderful? So notice what we have here. Remember what happens in Genesis 18 and the three men come to visit Abraham? Remember the first thing he does? Hey, would y'all like to stay for dinner? And of course, and some of you women will recognize this as true, right? Only after he invites him to stay for dinner does he actually tell his wife that they have company. Similar thing happens here. And then Manoah wants to know the name of this person, this figure. And here we get the big tip-off. Why do you need to ask my name? Seeing that surely by now you know that my name is wonderful. That is, this is the tip-off that what Manoah and his wife are encountering here is nothing less than God himself, who is intervening in the life of his people. And so here's what happens. So Manoah took the goat and with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord, to the one who works wonders. And Manoah and his wife were watching. And when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. Now Manoah and his wife were watching, and they fell on their faces to the ground. The angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and his wife. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord, and Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die, for we have seen God." And then we're told that sure enough, at the appointed time, Manoah's wife gives birth to Samson, and we'll take a look at what happens. So just two things here that we want to note here. Note what happens, that instead of staying for dinner, the angel of the Lord says, well, you know, I'm not going to eat your food, which is not being inhospitable, right? Which is a way of saying, I don't need it. So instead of dinner, what happens is a burnt offering. And remember, right, when we took a look at these, right, back in the book of Leviticus, remember the significance of the burnt offering? The burnt offering signified complete dedication to God because you took the offering and combusted it completely on the altar. Everything was burned up. So what we have here is we have this idea of Manoah and his wife now completely dedicated to God. So all that rings true. And then we have this worry, right? Oh my gosh. We've seen God, and now we're going to die because nobody sees God and lives. This reminds us of another important Old Testament story. It's something that happens back in Exodus 33 and 34. Remember where Moses asked to see God's face, and he's told that he can't see it. And what God does is God has Moses positioned on Mount Sinai, kind of wedged into some rocks, maybe like even like a small little cave. And God kind of passes by Mount Sinai so that Moses is not able to see God's face, but as the King James Version so wonderfully renders it, Moses is allowed to see God's nether parts. That is, right, there's a deep concern here that God is so transcendent, so holy, that we're sinful human beings to look upon him. They would essentially be like vaporized, gone. So there's something going on here that I think we want to notice here, and it's a good setup for what will happen later on. Really important theological message. In the face of Israel's chronic disobedience, in the face of Israel's chronic idolatry, in the face of Israel's constant covenant breaking, God's response is an act of condescension, whereby he comes to this pious couple and promises them a deliverer. That, of course, says something really important about who God is, that he does this. And therefore, right, we have like one of these really important sort of biblical paradigms, right? God's response to human sinfulness is this continuous pattern of the offering of mercy in the face of the human non-deserving of it. More about that later. Well, we'll see what happens when Samson tries to live into his vocation. Right off the bat in Judges 14, we'll get the details of Samson's very interesting courtship and marriage.